Ladies and gentlemen, listen carefully, because what I'm about to share can transform your life. Most people live as if they are trapped inside a story that was written years ago. Their thoughts are the same as yesterday, their emotions are recycled from past experiences, and their actions are predictable because they are rooted in memory. That repeated cycle is what we call the old self. But here's the truth. Your old self is not who you are. It's simply a program running automatically, day after day. If you want to delete your old self, you must first become aware of it. Ask yourself, what thoughts do I think every morning? What emotions do I rehearse over and over? Stress, worry, doubt. These are not personality traits, they are habits, and habits can be broken. Awareness is the first step to freedom. Science now tells us that every thought you think sends a chemical signal to the body. If you constantly think stressful thoughts, your body lives in stress. If you think empowering thoughts, your body aligns with empowerment. Over time, those repeated thoughts and feelings create your personality. So, if you want to change your personality, you must change your personal reality. Here's the beautiful part. Your brain is not fixed. It has something called neuroplasticity, which means you can literally rewire it. Every time you imagine a new possibility, every time you rehearse a new behavior in your mind, your brain begins to create new neural connections. It doesn't know the difference between a memory and a vision. So why keep rehearsing the old self when you can mentally rehearse the future you? Think about it. Athletes don't just train their bodies, they train their minds. They see themselves winning before they ever step into the arena. You can do the same. Visualize the confident you, the disciplined you, the grateful you. Feel what it feels like to live as that person. That emotional rehearsal is how you install a new self. But here's the catch. You must do it consistently. You cannot delete the old self by wishing for it to disappear. You replace it by practicing the new self so many times that the old wiring fades away. Just like learning a language or playing an instrument, the more you practice, the more natural it becomes. So, the question is, are you willing to stop living as a copy of your past and start living as the creator of your future? Because the moment you decide, the old self begins to die. And with every new thought, every new feeling, and every new action, you step into the greatest version of yourself. This is how you delete your old self, not by fighting it, but by outgrowing it. The old self is a program. Most people believe their identity is who they truly are, but in reality, it is simply a collection of thoughts, emotions, and behaviors that have been repeated so many times they became automatic. From the moment you wake up in the morning, your brain is already predicting who you will be based on yesterday. You reach for your phone the same way, you drink your coffee the same way, you think the same thoughts about your problems, your job, your relationships, and before long, your body has been conditioned to feel exactly the way it did yesterday. That repetition creates what feels like you. But if you look closely, you will see it's not really you. It's just a program running in the background of your life. When we call it a program, we mean that it operates automatically, without conscious effort. Think of how a computer works. Once a software is installed, it runs by itself, producing the same results again and again. The old self functions in a similar way. Years of thinking in the same patterns, responding with the same emotions, and acting out the same habits has hardwired the brain into a predictable state. This predictability might feel safe, but it also keeps you stuck. The old self is comfortable, familiar, and easy, but it does not allow growth. It limits the future because the past is constantly being recycled. The brain and body do not distinguish much between a deeply repeated thought and an actual event. If you constantly replay a painful memory, your body re-experiences the emotions as if it were happening right now. That is why people find themselves trapped in cycles of stress, sadness, or anger. They are unknowingly programming their body to stay loyal to the past. Over time, the body becomes so conditioned to these states that it begins to crave them, making the old self not just mental but physical. You might want change, but the body demands the familiar chemical rush of old emotions. This is why transformation feels like a struggle you are working against years of automated programming. Yet understanding that the old self is a program is incredibly empowering. Because if it is only a program, it can be rewritten. You are not doomed to be the person you were yesterday. You are not chained to your memories or your past identity. The brain has the extraordinary ability to change and adapt, a phenomenon known as neuroplasticity. When you introduce new thoughts, practice new emotions, and engage in new behaviors, you begin to install a new program, just as repetition created the old self. Conscious repetition can create the new self. The key is awareness. Once you recognize that much of who you believe you are is just memorized thoughts and feelings, you begin to step outside the program. You stop identifying with it and start observing it. The moment you catch yourself repeating an old thought or reacting with an old emotion, you are no longer fully inside the program. You are shining a light on it. This awareness gives you the power to choose something different. It may feel uncomfortable at first, because the body resists and craves the old familiar emotions, but if you persist, the new choices begin to take root. Imagine that every thought and emotion is like writing a line of code in your mind. For years, you've written the same code, so the outcome has always been the same. But now, by deliberately writing new lines of code, by imagining new possibilities, practicing gratitude, cultivating discipline, or embodying confidence, you begin to create a new program. Slowly, the old code weakens, and the new one strengthens. Over time, the brain rewires, the body reconditions, and the old self that felt so permanent dissolves into memory. What emerges is not someone you are pretending to be, but the truest version of yourself that was always waiting beneath the layers of programming. This understanding is revolutionary because it proves that change is not about fixing who you are. It's about uninstalling what no longer serves you and installing what aligns with the future you want. The old self was never you. It was only the story of your past repeated so many times it became automatic. And once you know it's just a program, you hold the power to delete it and replace it with a new one. Awareness is the first step. You cannot change what you are not aware of. And this is why so many people remain trapped in patterns they don't even realize they are repeating. Most individuals wake up each day and move through their lives on autopilot. They think the same thoughts, feel the same emotions, and act in the same ways without questioning them. When someone asks why their life hasn't changed, they may blame circumstances, luck, or other people, but the real reason is hidden in the unconscious programs running silently in the background. These programs are built from years of repetition, habits of thought, and feeling that feel so normal they become invisible. The key to transformation begins the moment you notice them, the moment you step outside the automatic cycle and truly observe yourself. Awareness is like turning on a light in a dark room. Before the light, everything is hidden, and you stumble around, colliding with the same obstacles again and again. When the light is switched on, nothing in the room has changed except your ability to see. Now, you can navigate clearly and make different choices. In life, awareness works in exactly the same way. You cannot change the old self until you see it for what it is, a set of unconscious habits. The act of noticing your own patterns is the beginning of freedom because what you observe, you can change. Consider how thoughts work. Every thought you have is a choice, but most people never consciously choose. Instead, they recycle yesterday's thoughts, and yesterday's thoughts produce today's emotions. When you are unaware of this process, you live in reaction to your own mind. But once you become aware, when you catch yourself thinking that same worry or repeating that same doubt, you create a space between stimulus and response. That space is where transformation begins. In that pause, you can decide, do I continue with this old pattern or do I choose something different? The same is true with emotions. People often believe their emotions are natural reactions to the world, but in truth, they are learned responses rehearsed again and again until they feel automatic. For example, if you constantly feel stressed in traffic, your body has memorized stress as its default response. The next time you get in traffic, you don't even think, it happens automatically. But awareness allows you to catch yourself in that moment and realize, this is not the only option. I don't have to feel this way. Simply noticing that you are repeating the past emotion interrupts the cycle. It gives you power to respond differently. Awareness is not about judgment or blame. It is not about criticizing yourself for being stuck in old habits. In fact, judgment only strengthens the old self because it is rooted in the same cycle of thought and emotion. True awareness is neutral. It is the ability to watch yourself with clarity like a scientist observing a subject. The more you practice this, the more you see how often your mind and body try to drag you back into the familiar patterns. You begin to realize that much of what you thought was you is simply conditioning. That realization is not discouraging. It is liberating, because if conditioning created it, new conditioning can undo it. One of the most powerful ways to cultivate awareness is through reflection. Take time each day to examine your thoughts and feelings. Ask yourself, what did I think about most today? What emotions did I feel repeatedly? What behaviors did I engage in without thinking? Write them down. When you bring them into the light of awareness, you remove their power to operate unconsciously. Over time, this practice builds a higher level of self-observation. Instead of being lost inside the program of your old self, you become the director, watching from the outside. Another way to strengthen awareness is through mindfulness practices. When you focus on your breath, your body, or your surroundings, you anchor yourself in the present moment. The present is the only place where true awareness exists, because the old self is always tied to the past. In awareness, you are no longer a prisoner of memory. You are awake, alive, and able to choose. The simple truth is this: without awareness, change is impossible, because you will continue to repeat the same unconscious cycles. With awareness, change becomes inevitable, because once you see the program, you can never fully unsee it. You now hold the power to step out of it and begin writing a new script. Awareness does not delete the old self immediately, but it opens the door. It shines the light that guides every step forward. It is the first and perhaps the most important step on the path of transformation. Thoughts create emotions, and this is one of the most powerful truths about the human mind and body. Every single thought you think is not just an invisible idea floating in your head. It is a signal that produces a biological response in your body. A thought is energy, and when you focus on it long enough, it releases chemicals that generate emotions. Those emotions then influence your actions, your behaviors, and eventually your identity. This is how your inner world creates your outer reality. Most people don't realize this connection and believe that their emotions are caused only by what happens outside of them. But the truth is, your emotions are more often the result of the thoughts you allow to dominate your mind. Imagine you start the morning thinking about a stressful meeting at work. That single thought triggers your brain to release stress hormones, such as cortisol, into your body. Now your heart rate increases, your breathing becomes shallow, and you feel anxious. You haven't even stepped into the meeting yet, but your body is already living in the future event. That is the power of thought. On the other hand, imagine starting the morning by thinking about something you are grateful for, your family, your health, your opportunities. Instantly, your brain releases different chemicals like dopamine and oxytocin, which make you feel calm, uplifted, and empowered. The external circumstances haven't changed, but your internal world has, simply because of what you chose to think about. Over time, repeated thoughts and the emotions they create become memorized in the body. If you constantly think fearful thoughts, you begin to live in fear. If you repeatedly dwell on lack, your body becomes conditioned to feel scarcity. Eventually, these emotions become so familiar that they turn into part of your personality. People start to identify themselves with these states. I am anxious. I am depressed. I am always stressed. But in truth, they are not those states. They are simply living in the chemical cocktail created by the thoughts they have been rehearsing day after day. Thoughts create emotions. Emotions create states of being, and states of being create identity. Understanding this connection is the foundation of transformation. If your thoughts are the architects of your emotions, then by changing your thoughts, you can reshape how you feel. And when you change how you feel, you change the actions you take, which changes the life you create. Most people attempt to change their lives by focusing only on action, working harder, pushing through stress, forcing themselves to achieve, but they never address the root cause, which is the thought-emotion cycle. Real change begins in the mind, not in the environment. The process requires awareness. You must begin to observe the kinds of thoughts you habitually think. Do you think thoughts of possibility, growth, and confidence? Or do you think thoughts of limitation, doubt, and fear? Once you identify the patterns, you can deliberately interrupt them. When you catch yourself thinking in a negative loop, you can pause and choose a new thought. At first, it may feel unnatural because the old thoughts are so deeply wired. But the brain is plastic. It can be rewired through repetition and intention. The more you choose empowering thoughts, the more you generate uplifting emotions, and the easier it becomes to sustain them. This is why visualization is such a powerful practice. When you vividly imagine a future where you are successful, confident and fulfilled, your brain and body begin to experience it as if it were real. The thoughts you hold in that visualization trigger the release of chemicals that produce elevated emotions: gratitude, excitement, joy. These emotions then send signals to your body that align it with the future you are imagining. In this way, you are literally rehearsing the future in advance, creating a state of being that matches what you want, rather than repeating the state of being tied to your past. It is important to remember that emotions are addictive. If you have been living in stress or anger for years, your body has become conditioned to those chemicals. It will crave them even if they make you miserable because they feel familiar. That is why transformation requires persistence. Each time you choose a new thought that produces a new emotion, you weaken the old chemical addiction. Over time, the body adjusts to the new emotions, and they become your new normal. This cycle works both ways. Negative thoughts create limiting emotions that hold you back, while empowering thoughts create elevated emotions that propel you forward. You always have the choice. By mastering your thoughts, you become the master of your emotions, and by mastering your emotions, you become the master of your destiny. Once you understand this link, you are no longer a victim of circumstance. You realize that your internal world is the driver of your external world, and that your future begins with the thoughts you allow yourself to think today. Neuroplasticity and change are two of the most empowering discoveries of modern science because they prove that you are never stuck being who you think you are. For centuries, people believed the brain was fixed, that once you reached adulthood, your neural pathways were permanently wired, and change was impossible. If you were born anxious, fearful, or limited, you would stay that way for life. But science has now revealed the opposite truth. The brain is plastic. It can reorganize itself, form new connections, and literally rewire its structure throughout your lifetime. This means that no matter how long you have been living as your old self, no matter how deeply ingrained your habits are, you have the ability to change them by changing your brain. Every thought you think fires a network of neurons. When you repeat the same thought over and over, those neurons wire together, creating a strong connection. This is why habits feel automatic, because the neural pathway has become so well traveled that it requires no effort to activate. The brain, like a machine, looks for efficiency. If you keep thinking the same worry, the same doubt, the same memory, the brain strengthens those pathways and makes them your default mode. This is the biological basis of the old self. It is simply the most rehearsed neural patterns. But neuroplasticity means you can build new pathways. Every time you introduce a new thought, a new emotion, or a new behavior, you are carving a fresh connection in your brain. At first, it may feel weak and unnatural, like walking through tall grass where no trail exists. But with repetition, that trail becomes a path and the old one begins to fade. Change, therefore, is not about forcing yourself to be different overnight. It is about patiently rewiring the brain to favor new connections over old ones. Think of it like training a muscle. The first time you lift a weight, it feels awkward and difficult. But with consistent training, the muscle grows stronger, and what once felt impossible becomes easy. Your brain works the same way. Each time you choose a new thought instead of an old one, you are training your neural circuitry. Each time you practice gratitude instead of worry, courage instead of fear, discipline instead of laziness, you are strengthening the new self at the biological level. Visualization and mental rehearsal play a powerful role here because the brain does not clearly distinguish between a vividly imagined experience and a real one. If you close your eyes and mentally rehearse speaking confidently, achieving success, or living in abundance, your brain fires the same neural circuits as if you were physically doing it. This rehearsal strengthens those circuits, creating new wiring that supports the identity you want to embody. Athletes, performers, and leaders have used this principle for decades to achieve excellence. Now we know the science behind it. Mental practice literally changes the brain's structure. The beauty of neuroplasticity is that it works both ways. If you continue to dwell on the past, repeat negative thoughts, and live in familiar emotions, you strengthen the old pathways, and your old self becomes even more automatic. But if you commit to practicing new thoughts, emotions, and behaviors, you gradually rewire your brain for the future you desire. You are not a victim of your past wiring. You are the architect of your future wiring. The brain will adapt to whatever you repeatedly feed it. This is why consistency is crucial. Rewiring the brain is not a one-time event, it is a process. You may feel resistance in the beginning because the old neural pathways are still stronger. But the more you persist, the more the new connections take root. Over time, the brain begins to favor the new self naturally, and what once felt difficult becomes effortless. You no longer have to fight to think positively or act with confidence. It becomes who you are because your brain has been rewired to support it. Understanding neuroplasticity means understanding that change is always possible. No matter your age, your background, or your past mistakes, your brain is capable of creating a new reality. Every moment you are alive, you have the opportunity to lay down new wiring that supports a better version of yourself. You are not bound by destiny or by genetics. You are shaped by the thoughts, emotions, and actions you repeat. When you grasp this truth, you step into full responsibility for your life. You no longer say, "This is just the way I am." Instead, you say, "This is the way I have been, and this is the way I choose to become." Visualization and practice are the tools that turn possibility into reality. It is not enough to know that you want to change, and it is not enough to hope for a better future. You must rehearse it into being. The mind and body are shaped by repetition, and just as the old self was built by repeating the same patterns over and over, the new self must be installed through conscious practice. Visualization is the act of creating an image of your future self so vivid that your brain and body begin to respond as if it were already real. When you combine that vision with practice, mental and physical, you are literally programming yourself into a new identity. Most people underestimate the power of imagination. They think visualization is just daydreaming, but the science proves otherwise. When you visualize clearly and emotionally, your brain activates the same neural circuits that would fire if you were physically experiencing the event. Imagine standing on a stage speaking confidently, or imagine yourself waking up early with discipline, or imagine living with joy and gratitude. In that moment, your brain does not fully distinguish between the imagined and the real. It wires new circuits that match the vision. This is why elite athletes spend hours visualizing their performance before a competition. They are not only practicing physically, they are conditioning their brain to see victory as inevitable. Visualization becomes even more powerful when you attach elevated emotions to it. If you simply imagine something without feeling it, the brain registers it as a weak possibility. But if you visualize yourself living your desired future and at the same time generate the emotions of joy, gratitude, excitement, and confidence, your body begins to feel as though it is already there. Those emotions send chemical signals throughout your system, conditioning you to live in alignment with that vision. The body becomes primed for the future instead of addicted to the past. Practice is the reinforcement of this vision. It is one thing to see your new self in your mind. It is another to begin embodying it in daily life. Every time you act in accordance with the identity you are visualizing, you strengthen the new wiring. For example, if you visualize yourself as disciplined and then follow through by waking up early or sticking to your commitments, you are aligning thought, emotion, and action. That alignment is what accelerates transformation. Your old self was built unconsciously by thought, feeling, and behavior working together. Your new self must be built consciously in exactly the same way. The key to making visualization and practice effective is repetition. Doing it once or twice is not enough. The brain changes through consistent rehearsal, just as a muscle grows through repeated training. Each time you practice your vision, you are telling your brain and body, "This is who I am." At first, the old self will resist, because the body has been conditioned to expect familiar emotions and behaviors. But persistence weakens the old wiring and strengthens the new one. Over time, the body begins to trust the new identity, and what once felt like effort becomes natural. There is also a subtle but vital shift that happens through visualization and practice. Instead of waiting for the environment to change so you can feel different, you practice feeling different now so that your environment changes to match you. Most people say, "When I succeed, I'll feel confident. When I have more money, I'll feel abundant. When I find the right relationship, I'll feel loved." This is living as a victim of circumstance. Visualization flips the equation. You feel the emotions of success, abundance, and love before they arrive. And by practicing those emotions, you align your state of being with the future you want. Eventually, your external reality begins to reflect your internal state. The process is not about pretending or faking. It is about rehearsing until your mind and body accept the new self as truth. Think of a musician who practices a song until it flows effortlessly, or a pilot who rehearses simulations until flying feels automatic. In the same way, you rehearse your new self until living it becomes natural. The old self then fades not because you forced it away, but because it was replaced by something stronger and more consistent. Visualization and practice are bridges to transformation. They connect who you are today to who you want to become. They remind you daily that your future is not an accident waiting to happen, but a vision waiting to be installed. Every time you close your eyes and vividly imagine, every time you act in alignment with that vision, you are carving out a new reality. The more you do it, the more you embody it, until one day you realize the new self is no longer just a vision. It is you. Consistency creates transformation, and this truth is what separates temporary motivation from lasting change. Anyone can feel inspired for a day or two. Anyone can try a new habit for a week, but real transformation requires sustained effort over time. The old self was not built overnight. It was created through years of repeated thoughts, emotions, and behaviors. Every morning you woke up and thought the same way. Every situation you faced where you reacted the same way. Every choice you made that reinforced the same pattern. All of that consistency created who you are today. If the old self was built by repetition, then the new self must be built in the same way. Change is not about dramatic bursts of effort. It is about steady, intentional practice that compounds over days, weeks, and months until it becomes your new normal. Consistency matters because the brain and body learn through reinforcement. When you introduce a new thought or behavior, at first it feels unfamiliar. The brain resists, the body craves the old chemical states, and everything in you wants to return to what feels safe and known. This is where most people quit. They expect change to feel easy, and when it doesn't, they believe it's impossible. But those who stay consistent, even when it feels uncomfortable, begin to create new wiring in the brain. Each repetition strengthens the new pathway, and each day of practice weakens the hold of the old self. What feels unnatural in the beginning slowly becomes automatic. Think of learning any skill. When a child learns to walk, they don't succeed on the first attempt. They fall, stumble, and fail repeatedly. Yet through consistent practice, walking becomes second nature. The same principle applies to transformation. You may fall back into old patterns. You may feel tempted to give up. But if you continue to return to your vision and practice the new self, consistency will eventually carry you across the threshold into lasting change. Consistency also builds trust with yourself. Each time you keep a promise to practice your new self, whether that is through meditation, visualization, journaling, or acting differently in daily situations, you strengthen your belief in your own ability to change. The old self thrives on self-doubt, telling you you've always been this way, you'll never change. But every act of consistency proves that story wrong. Over time, you begin to see yourself as capable, disciplined, and committed. This shift in identity is one of the most powerful aspects of transformation, and it can only come from consistent practice. The truth is, consistency matters more than intensity. Doing something small every day is more powerful than doing something huge once in a while. If you meditate for 5 minutes daily, visualize your new self each morning, and consciously choose new thoughts throughout the day, that steady repetition rewires your brain more effectively than a single intense effort that is never repeated. Transformation is not about perfection, it is about persistence. The small, consistent choices you make accumulate into massive results over time. There will be moments when the old self tries to pull you back. Stress, challenges, or triggers from the environment will tempt you to return to familiar thoughts and emotions. In those moments, consistency is the anchor that keeps you moving forward. Even if you slip, what matters is that you return to the practice again and again. Each time you do, you are training your brain and body to remain loyal to the new self instead of the old. This is how consistency turns into resilience, and resilience ensures transformation lasts. Consistency also has a compounding effect. The more you practice being the new self, the more evidence you create that supports your transformation. Each day you visualize, you strengthen the neural circuits of your future identity. Each time you choose gratitude instead of worry, you condition your body to a new chemical state. Each action reinforces the next, and soon the momentum builds. What once required conscious effort begins to happen automatically. because you have repeated it so often that the new self has become the default program. Transformation is not an event, it is a process. And the process requires patience. Just as a seed planted in the ground does not sprout overnight, your new self requires nurturing over time. The seed must be watered daily, even when you cannot see growth above the surface. In the same way, your consistent practice is building roots beneath the surface, wiring your brain and conditioning your body until one day the results become visible. The people around you may notice it before you do. Your energy feels different, your habits have changed, your presence is stronger. That is the power of consistency. Ultimately, consistency is the bridge between intention and transformation. Without it, change remains an idea, wish, or a fleeting burst of motivation. With it, change becomes inevitable. The old self dissolves not because you fought it once, but because you consistently replaced it with something new until it had no power left. Every day you choose to practice your new self, you are casting a vote for the future you want. Over time, those votes add up, and the balance tips in favor of transformation. Consistency is not glamorous, but it is unstoppable. It is the quiet, steady force that deletes the old self and brings the new self fully to life.